So far what we have seen is we have identified or we have collated the commonly used or the unchanged values inside a config file as being a XML file. We collated username and password and we identified those values, and for those particular keys as username and password, we added the information as to their values into a dictionary. And then we tried getting the data from the dictionary for username or for password being the key. And then we took the data from using get dictionary, and we will use it elsewhere in the project. So continuing from there, so what we are going to do right now is we have the username and password in our XML file. So assuming this is our config XML file, so now what I am going to do is I'm going to choose the username and password from the XML file, and I'm going to add it to the dictionary and get this value inside my program at runtime and use these values from the dictionary and log into a browser. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to try and use a browser automation or use a web automation using UiPath. So continue with web automation using UiPath. So far we have continued until what we will add it into dictionary and stuff like that. Now what we'll see is how can we retrieve the information from the dictionary and use it elsewhere in your project. So using it elsewhere in our cases, I'm going to use it as a login username and login password. So let me consider I'm going to log into a Flipkart. I'm just going to log in. I've opened my browser. So I'm just going to use flipkart.com. So assuming what I'm going to do is I'm going to log into my Flipkart. Say there's already something that has been logged in. So what I'm going to do is the moment I enter the URL. So what happens is it prompts me for the username and password. So what am I going to do is I'm going to get the information from the XML file, say the username as abc@gmail.com and the password is flipkart123. So now what my UiPath program is going to do is get the information from the credentials.xml file and it's going to enter it here. So this is the web automation that we are trying to do. So what is web automation? So how do we do web automation? Basically, when we're talking about a browser automation or doing on any window, for that we use some concept called selectors. So selectors are nothing but your user interface is there. So which can be a browser, which can be a notepad file, or which can be any Windows application or a web application. So consider that is a user interface. How do you go and you need to enter your username and password? So you identify the user interface having the text boxes. So beside the email or beside the login or beside your username, you have to enter your actual username. So as a human, when you're able to identify that, UiPath will not be able to identify that as such. So in order for UiPath to identify that, every information that is there as text box or buttons or all the controls that is there inside your particular user interface, we use something called a selector. So a selector is nothing but the entire UI element's address, if I can say. So the entire UI element is nothing but a text box that you can see in your web browser or in your whatever, be it your Windows application. So a selector would have a particular ID for that particular text box that you're going to use. So what we do is we identify that particular text boxes, selector values or the address. And once we identify that, you will be able to teach the UiPath program to go and select that particular text box as a normal human would do. So in our case, how will a selector be actually? So this is an example of the selector would actually be containing a element type and an attribute. Okay, so the element type is going to be, it could be a Windows application, it could be a HTML application, or it could be a web application, or any kind of application that you're going to see, that is your user interface. So the element type gets displayed here. So if you see, if I'm going to open a chrome.exe and I'm doing a web browser, I'm using a web browser. So here I would be seeing the HTML app. So basically, when you're using a web automation or web selector or web tool or web browser in our case, you would be getting HTML as your element type. When you're using Windows application, you would be getting WND as your element type. And basically after that comes your attributes. So attributes are nothing but these are the properties of that particular element. So if you have a text box, if it needs a text inside it, or if it has something already written inside, pre-written already inside that. So all these are properties of that particular or attributes of that particular element, so that this information will be collated together by the UiPath and identify that particular element. So basically, it's like you're giving your, instead of saying your locality where you live in, you're just going to give your street number, your house number, and everything, so that your locality gets easily identified by the person who's searching for you. Basically, the same thing that UiPath also does. So, how many number of attributes that you're going to give in your selector, UiPath reaches the element more easily. So that is the selector that we get. So how do we actually identify the selector? Because in our, you cannot just go and identify the selector. How do we actually identify the selector is that UI Explorer. So this is your user interface explorer, which you might be using to identify selector of a particular UI element. So what is there in your UI Explorer? So I'm just trying to open the UI Explorer, and you will see a list of information that's available. You will see, buttons like validate, indicate element, indicate anchor, and stuff like that. So what do we actually do? So I have a browser here. So what is my UI element that I need for your username and password? So I need to enter my UI element here. So what I do is, this is my UI element to enter my username, and this is my UI element to enter the password. So what happens here is, I would identify this as a element for which I need to for which I need to find the selector, so that my UiPath can understand in a way that it needs to come and enter the username here only. So what am I going to do is, I'm going to go ahead and say, and I'm going to indicate the element. So I will go indicate this particular element, and I will say this is the selector of the particular element. So you would see there's an HTML title. This is the title of that particular browser page. So this is the HTML title. This is the element type of the particular selector. And then you have a list of attributes. Basically, if you want a couple of other attributes, you can go ahead and add here. So these are the default kind of attributes that you have. You can go ahead and add here. So by this, you identify what actual selector you want. So in case you want another selector that you need to identify, you can go and identify your element. So I'm going and identify edit password. So again, my type gets changed to password, and you have couple of other information that is available. So in case you need to take it, you can go ahead and take it. So like this, you would go. So similarly, if you need to identify some other element, say request OTP. So this is a button. So basically you would, the tag is button there. So basically you would say request OTP is another UI element that your UI Explorer has identified. So like this, what happens is, you would be identifying your selector using the UI Explorer. Now that you have identified the selector, now for you to check whether this particular selector is correct or not, because at runtime sometimes whatever you have indicated might be, might have some spelling mistakes or something that you might have changed by mistake. So for you to validate that particular info, whether you have copied or whether your UI Explorer has identified the valid selector only, you need to go and click on validate. So if you go and click on validate, it changes to green if the selector is right. If it is red, it means that your selector is wrong. So you need to identify the element again. And if it is an amber, you just have some information that has been changed. So you can go ahead and identify the element again. So go indicate element again, and you can go and do the validate again, making sure that the entire selector is properly selected. And then if you need to say, you want to highlight, so whatever selector has been selected here, that particular element will be highlighted in your browser. So this is what the highlight stands for. So this is how you basically use the UI Explorer in order to pick the selector of a particular UI element, and you can use it inside your program. Now consider our program that we are going to use. So I'm just closing this UI Explorer, and so now what happened was, I read the config file, I got the information added to the dictionary. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to remove all the previous information that I've seen. So I'm just going to say I've added to dictionary right now. So what is the information that I need to get from the dictionary? Yeah. So I need to basically get the username and the password. So what am I going to do is, I'm just going to get the information from the dictionary and make sure my program can use it to enter into the Flipkart website. So what have I done is I have used the option as get from dictionary, and from get from dictionary I've given the field as username. So username here is nothing but your key that you have actually given here. So when I give the key as username and say get from dictionary, it is going to give me the value abc@gmail.com. So I'm giving a str username to hold that abc@gmail.com. So once I hold that particular information, and yeah, so once I use that particular information, I'm going to go and get the password. So again, what I need to do is I need to drag another information as get from dictionary. I'm going to select again string comma string because that was the information that we have given here. And then I'm going to say what is a dictionary name. This is the same as it was previously. So what is the key there? The key is going to be the password that we have identified in the XML file. And I'm going to give a variable to hold that particular password that is picked up from the, I'm just giving it as str password. So there a new variable gets created, a new string variable gets created with the name str password. So what this is going to give me is the output would be username, where in turn it's going to give me str username is equal to abc@gmail.com, and the password would be password 123 or Flipkart 123, whatever it returns from the XML file. Now that we have identified and we have got the information, now I need to go back into my browser and say my bot to actually click on that particular, you're going to log into that browser and say, you need to enter your username and password. So how do I manually do? I've got the information of username and password. So when I need to manually do this, basically I will be opening a browser, say Internet Explorer, and I would go key in the flipkart.com URL and then go ahead and type in the username and password. So what am I going to do? The same manual steps I need to reciprocate it to the UiPath bot. So what am I going to do is I'm just going to add the functionality of how you open a browser and how do you key in your username and password. So what I'll do is, so this is a sequence. I'm going to add another sequence. So this was a sequence to read data and dictionary add. So what my next sequence is going to do is it's going to, whatever value was fetched from the dictionary, it's going to do it into the browser. So what am I going to do? I'm just going to go and select the browser option. So first thing I need to go, so this comes under UI automation browser. Under this, you will see a list of activities that will be, pertaining to the browser automation that you're doing. So what am I going to do is I'm just going to go and say, first of all, I need to open the browser and then I need to give the URL, which is the flipkart.com. So the same thing, whatever I do it manually, I'm just going to put it as a activity here. So I will go ahead. Let me drag a sequence before that to say this is the sequence for the browser. So I'm putting another sequence which says browser activities. And now I'm going to go and add all the information that I need to add. So what am I going to do here is I'm going to open a browser. So literally when I'm opening a browser, literally this particular activity is going to actually open the browser. So that is what it is going to do. So it will open the Internet Explorer browser and it is going to say what is the URL that you need to enter. So in our case, it's going to be flipkart.com. So I'm just copying the flipkart.com and I'm going to enter it here. And you have to make sure that you enter it inside double quotes. So there I'm opening the browser and I'm going to, give the URL is flipkart.com. So now assuming the browser is open, now I need to identify and type in the password and the username here. So what am I going to do is I need to identify the UI element of this particular thing and teach my UiPath program to enter the information here. So I'm going to use my UI Explorer to go ahead and fetch the information of that particular UI element where you're going to indicate your username or where you're going to type your username. UI Explorer. indicate elements, and I'm going to indicate my field or my UI element where I need to enter my username. So now that the username has been taken up, I don't want the class, so I'm just, taking off, I'm sorry, I don't want the CSS, so I'm just taking off that particular thing. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy it. So basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to type my username here, right? abc@gmail.com. So where I need to type in the particular element that is here. So I've identified the element I'm going to use. So now that I've identified the element, I'm copying the element by path program. So here what am I going to do is, I am going to say I need to type the password. So basically to type the password, we have a command or we have an activity called type into. So there's keyboard, type into, and you drag that particular activity and you're going to say, I'm going to type into where you have something called input. This is where you're going to give the selector information. So how do you select? You just go click on these three dots. You're going to open, you're going to put a double quotes, copy the information of the selector, paste the information of the selector that you have copied from the UI Explorer. Now that you can just, expand this particular stuff so that it comes in the same line. So now that this is, copied and pasted here, you have to make sure this entire stuff comes in a single line. Okay. So what am I going to do is, I'm just going to put everything into a single line. So I'm just deleting all the spaces out there and I'm making sure it comes into a single line. So what here, and I do a okay. So which means it will go and type into this particular UI element selector. Okay. So what is a UI element type, or you're going to type into the email, or you're going to type into your username that you have. So which field you're going to type into, you mention it as a selector. So once you're typing it into that particular field, so what you need to type, so you have identified the UI element, but you have to know what you're going to enter there. You need to enter abc@gmail.com. But where is that abc@gmail.com? It is in your dictionary. So we'll have to go back to your previous activity where you identified, you got the information from the dictionary saying, okay, if the key was username, you have copied that particular value of the username key into str username. So I'm going to key in this value into my login field. So here what am I going to say is str username. So okay, my information is not coming in right now because I've chosen my variable type scope as, so if you see, my scope is just restricted to this particular information. I'm trying to use the variable in the next activity or the next sequence, which will not work. So basically what I'm doing is I'm changing the scope of my str username to the overall sequence and the str password to the overall sequence. So this is my overall sequence, so that I need to use my particular str username and password throughout the sequence. So I'm just changing the scope here. So once I change the scope, I should be able to see the str username available. So I'm going to type into the email field where the selector of the email field is here, which is the UI element here. And what am I going to type? I'm going to type the str username which I got from the dictionary. Now the similar information will go for the password as well. So I'm copying a type into for the password, but again I have to identify a the UI element's address. So now I'm going to go back to indicate element and I'm going to say enter passwords UI element is identified. Now I'm going to copy this particular information, come back to my UiPath, and I'm going to say in my target selector, I'm going to click on the three dots, just expand this for your information, and double quotes. Inside the double quotes, I'm just going to copy the information, make sure that you have everything moved into single line. So now that you have got a type into on the username field where you're going to type the str username, and a type into on the password field and you're going to give str password. So you had typed into everything. Now what you're going to do as a human, what you will be doing, you would be After once you key in your str username and your password, you would go and press on login, right? You're going to go and click on login. So we need to teach the UiPath program as well to go and log in. So in order to click on a button, so we have something called click. So you have the element, it comes under UI automation element, and you will see a couple of activities under that. So you're going to use click. What am I going to click? I'm going to click a particular selector which is there as login button. So I need to identify the logins buttons selector first. So I'm going back to the UI Explorer. I'm going to understand indicate element. You can indicate any element that's there on your page. You can everything. If you see, uh, I'm just spying over the entire sheet, entire web browser. I'm able to identify every other UI element that's there in this particular sheet. I mean, that's there in this particular browser. So for our case, we are going to use login. So click on login and you have your selector here. So copy the selector. It's already in green. So your selector is right. So copy the selector, go back to your UiPath Studio, and then say in your selector, the same, the process. So double quotes, copy the information, bring everything to the single line, and you give OK. So now that you've got, so what did I do? So far we have identified adding it to the dictionary and stuff. So I got the information from dictionary, and I'm trying to open a browser using the open browser activity, given the URL as to what URL you need to open, and identify the UI elements where you're going to type into. So for you to type into any particular UI element, you use the option type into, and to click on a particular UI element, you're going to use the click option. Now that, assuming you have already logged in, so after login, you need to make sure that you are logging out. So you have to, right? So let's not worry about the logout for now. Let's just try and log in. Just use this particular program and try and do the login. So I'm just going to go. So let me put a message box here just to say that we have successfully logged in. Okay, and I'm going to say successfully logged in. So with this, I'm just going to run the program. So what it will do is, okay, we have got message boxes, a few message boxes in our dictionary. So we are trying to add to the dictionary. The password gets added, so added to dictionary. Now we have open browser going, and the password is there, and it is trying to log in and successfully logged in. But unfortunately, what has happened is we don't have this email ID, which is an active email ID. So basically the email ID is just going to say, it's incorrect or stuff like that. So when you're checking with your own email ID, it will be working fine. So what we have seen is so once it presses login, basically you would get a logged in screen on your particular, if you type in with the correct username, I mean user credentials. So this is how you do a web automation where you're teaching your UiPath Studio or UiPath Robot to log into a particular web browser or web URL and identify the elements using the UiPath Explorer. So every other activity here that you have is going to be doing in the same case. So basically, whenever you're going to work on a particular Windows user interface or a HTML user interface, you have to make sure that your target selector is selected. So selector is nothing but the address of a particular UI element or the user interface element that is available in your browser or in your Windows application wherever you are. So this is how you do a basic automation on a web browser.